going on 5 albums, you've been working with a full band, but you're still writing most of the material yourself, right?
That's right. Yeah, I'm quite a bad collaborator, to be honest. I don't like when I'm writing bouncing ideas backs and forwards between people. I like to sit on my own and make my mistakes and try in private and try things which may or may not work and not be worried what anyone else might be thinking at any moment in time. And I've always sort of been quite insular in that way. So the way we work now is the same way we worked back in when we first started, which is I create demos from scratch, full music demos, bass, drums, guitars, but no vocals, and then hand that to the rest of the guys to put their own stamp on. And, sometimes we might change some of the structures here and there, but more often than not, I've worked out how the song is going to be structured, and that's how it is. And there's not much changing of it, because by the time I got to that point, I spent so much time working out when the song should be done and what it needs and what it's lacking, that by the time it gets to the guys, by the time I'm ready to share it, I sort of refined it enough anyway. And more often than not, they're working at that point anyway, and they don't need changing.
Now, for you, do you start with a riff, or are things sometimes more ephemeral? Like, do you have a feeling or kind of an idea how you want a song to flow?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. More often than not, it's a riff. And usually it's something that appears by accident. I think probably 95% of the time it's guitar riff or a guitar part. And once I've got that, I work out whether that part is a chorus or a verse or a bridge or what, and work backwards or forwards from that. So, for example, on the new album, on the last song, The Mad White Hair, how I wrote that actually was I wrote that very small, radio box guitar part in the center first. I just came up with that while I was playing around with that particular guitar sound, and I liked it. And from that direction, I wrote forwards and backwards until the whole thing was completed. So that one started off as a really insignificant part of what the song was, but the feel of that inspired everything that came before it and afterwards. And I think the other end of that was the second song, Clemency and Atrophy. That started off because I really wanted something to have just a drum beat and a bass guitar with a groove and nothing else. And so I worked on that until that was right, and then built everything around that. So it's always a musical start. It's never anything too ethereal.
So the album that we're talking about is called Fly Blown Prince.
Yes.
And it came out on June 4th through Dark Essence Records. Andrew, when did you actually start working on this album?
It's probably about 3 years ago, I would say. It takes a long time. It took me, this one took a particularly long time. It took me about a year to write it, I would say, musically. And I think we really, really laboured on every single detail on this to make sure it was as perfect as it could be. So, for example, some songs have tens and tens of different layers and little subtle sounds in there, which needed to be made sure that they were working in the context of everything else, and there weren't any notes which were jarring in the wrong way. And also from a mix perspective, it was really important to make sure everything was heard, but not heard too much, if you know what I mean. So everything had a purpose. So it was definitely something which took an awful long time. It was about a year writing, another 3/4 of a year recording, another half a year mixing and everything. And yeah, before you know it, that's 3 years, I think.
So you're actually based in New Zealand right now, right?
Mm.
How did that affect the collaboration with you based in New Zealand, and I believe your bandmates are still in the UK?
Yeah, it was a very difficult one. I think this is one of those occasions where life gets in the way, and it was a personal reason for moving here, and I knew it was going to be difficult, and it was a really tough call to leave the guys behind. But we are still working really well, even despite the distance. So I make sure I go back to England when life is normal anyway, once or twice a year to either do some recording or some shows or something. So we keep that going. And of course we're in touch, daily anyway, all the time, because we're a close group of guys. So it does mean that we're not rehearsing as much as we were. We used to rehearse an awful lot. But what that does mean is that we put in the hard work so that when we do get together for a show or something like that, we only need one rehearsal or something like that, and we're back to where we were, because we're so used to playing with each other, and a lot of the back catalogue of songs we do play are so ingrained in us now that it doesn't take long to remember how to play them. So yeah, it's not ideal, but we're making it work.
Now, did you end up recording this yourself?
It varied. So the drums were recorded when I was back in England about a year and a half ago, and the idea was to record some more of it together as well. But COVID got in the way, so we ended up doing quite a lot of the rest of it remotely. So I recorded the guitars myself over here. The vocals were recorded in England, as were the bass, and then I brought the files over here and put it all together ready for the mix, which was then originally done in England before. Yeah, we had a couple of more goes at it to get it to where we wanted it to. So it's the drums were the one bit which was more of a collaborative effort, I would say, but everything else we were bouncing between each other remotely.
Now, is this the first time that you've put an album together remotely?
No, to be honest, we've done that more often than not. So the first album, we were all together locked away in a studio for 3 weeks doing that. But the second one, there was all sorts of, so that's Resplendent Grotesque, the second album. There was all sorts of, band lineup changes around that time. So the drums were done. I went in afterwards to do the mixing because all the guitars I'd recorded separately. Then we had to go away and do the vocals and then come back again and mix it again. So that was all done in different sessions too. And the third album was done in a similar way as well. I think the only two which were done in a studio in one go together would be the first album, Nouveau Gloaming, and the one before this, which was a much simpler album as well, which meant that we could go in there and do it in one go. I think if we'd have tried to do this album in the studio in one go, it'd have ended up costing us a fortune because there are so many guitar layers in there and so much detail that just tracking it would have been, prohibitively expensive with how much recording costs compared to what revenue is from sales these days. So you have to be sensible with the money you're given. And so we spent the money as best we could on drums and the mix and master and everything else that we can do ourselves based on the experience we've gathered. We did. So we're trying to be as efficient as possible. But bearing in mind, we spent a lot of time recording over the last 20 years ourselves in one way or another. So we know what to do to at least get something to that professional level.
Musically, how would you compare Fly Blown Prince to the previous Code albums?
I think it's when I was writing it, it did feel to me more similar to Resplendent Grotesque than any of the other albums, I would say, and that's partly down to the type of guitar sound I was using and what the way that makes me play. So it's that kind of sharp but not too distorted sound. So everything is very, very audible, and that makes me play in a certain way. And it's kind of similar to what I did on the second one. I think it's not as concise as Resplendent Grotesque, and I think it's probably got a little bit of perhaps Nouveau Gloaming and a little bit of Organox in terms of the scope of it. I think the one album it's not close to, obviously, is the one before the Mut album, which was a thing all of its own, really. But I think it's closest to Resplendent Grotesque out of all of them, but it's definitely not repeating that, I would say. You can't call them similar albums.
Fly Blown Prince will be your first album for Dark Essence Records, right?
That's right, yes.
How did they get involved with this release? How did you end up getting in touch with them?
Well, we've been in touch with them for quite a long time, actually. So back in the Resplendent Grotesque days, we did one of their showcase festival type shows in Norway. So that was in, 2009 or something like that. And we've been in touch with them ever since. And when we came time to looking for a new label, they were a really clear choice for me to ask to see if they would be interested, because they are, quite a small label, but very professional and take great care of all the releases they put out, rather than just, having huge numbers of releases and not being able to pay attention to them as much as we would like. So for us, it's the perfect match. And yeah, they've been absolutely wonderful, and we're looking forward to continuing with them definitely.
You've also self-released albums through your own label, right?
Yeah, in the past, yes. Yeah. That's kind of like more like a necessity, really. That started because when we did Resplendent Grotesque, that was before vinyl really took off as something which people were really, really interested in. But for us in the band, it was kind of essential. We all came from a background where, vinyl was really important, and I wanted it to be released. So I ended up starting the label to put out the vinyl version of that album, just because we wanted to take control of it ourselves, and the label were happy for us to do that. And then from then I ended up doing more releases of pieces of music which weren't massively commercially viable. So I would do that, and that labels weren't necessarily going to be too interested in. So I'd do small numbers of quite, niche packaging ideas, just small numbers. And so people who are interested in it could get hold of something physical, but we didn't need to go through the whole, trying to find a label for everything and getting turned down for doing a cassette release because it doesn't make financial sense, but we still wanted to do it. So it was that avenue to release things which labels generally wouldn't want to do, which is kind of different now, because it's come around full circle, because now most labels are going to put out vinyl releases and cassette releases and tape releases of everything. So the lead for that is kind of gone, which is why the label doesn't really exist anymore.
In your opinion, what is the purpose of a label in 2021?
I think as much as people would like to do things themselves, there are still financial aspects which most people are going to need help with. So it costs a lot of money to make an album. It costs a huge amount of money to press an album. And also the time taken to promote it is not insignificant. And I personally do not have time to write, record, and then try and promote music, without help. That's something I do not have time to do, and I don't have the skill to do and the connections to do. So that's what labels do for us. I guess that model might be changing at the moment, and people are starting to do things a little bit differently, a little bit more DIY. But life is too short, and I haven't got the time to do it. And the labels are, if you pick the right label, they're good at doing it. So yeah, it's the money, time, and experience.
Is there also an aspect to, for example, Dark Essence has, it's not a particularly big label, but it's got a niche of black metal bands and some very well-respected names. Is there also an aspect of, I'm not sure what the word is, but, being associated with the label and the acts on the label, you're in good company, so to speak?
Yeah, it's definitely important to be with a label that you respect and that you appreciate the other bands on the label. Yeah, because if anything, it shows that they're on the same wavelength musically and are going to appreciate what you do. So that is important. And I think what I said earlier is increasingly important as well, that having a label that is putting out not too many releases, but is taking a lot of care over them and making sure that what they put out is aligned with how the label feels almost. And I think although the acts on the label are quite different, I don't think any of them stand out of place as something which just doesn't fit. So I think that is important, and also having a good relationship with the people on the label and knowing that the guys are going to do the right thing and stand by you is the important thing too.